Heroes come in many forms, but some heroes carry burdens that would break ordinary people. When firefighter Michael O'Brien walked onto Ellen's stage, everyone expected to celebrate his courage. Nobody expected him to reveal the choice that haunted his every waking moment, the choice between being a hero to strangers and being a father to his son. It was a crisp Monday morning at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, and the Ellen DeGeneres Show was radiating its signature warmth. Ellen appeared on stage wearing a light blue blazer that perfectly complemented the show's iconic backdrop, her energy bright and welcoming as she addressed the enthusiastic audience of 300. "Good morning, everyone," Ellen called out, her arms spread wide as the crowd responded with thunderous applause. "Today we're doing something very special. We're honoring real-life heroes, the people who risk everything to keep the rest of us safe." The audience settled into respectful attention as Ellen moved to center stage, her expression becoming more serious, more reverent. "The man you're about to meet represents the very best of humanity," Ellen continued, her voice carrying genuine admiration. "Last month, he ran into a burning apartment building and saved 5 lives. 5 families got their loved ones back because of his courage." The studio erupted in applause, the kind of organic, emotional response that came when people recognized genuine heroism. Ellen waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Captain Michael O'Brien of the Chicago Fire Department." The spotlight found Michael immediately, and he stood slowly from his seat in the 3rd row. He was 45 years old with graying brown hair and the solid build of someone who had spent decades in physically demanding work. He wore his dress uniform navy blue with gold buttons and badges that caught the studio lights and carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone uncomfortable with attention but accustomed to duty. As Michael made his way to the stage, Ellen watched his face carefully. She'd interviewed hundreds of heroes over the years, and they usually fell into 2 categories: those who were energized by recognition and those who were humbled by it. Michael fell into neither category. There was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like reluctance. "Captain O'Brien," Ellen said warmly as he reached the stage, extending her hand in greeting. "Thank you so much for being here." "Thank you for having me, Ellen," Michael replied, his voice deep and steady with a slight Chicago accent. His handshake was firm, but Ellen noticed his palm was slightly damp with nervous sweat. "Please, sit down and get comfortable," Ellen said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs that had been arranged for their conversation. "I have to say, looking at you in that uniform, you absolutely look the part of a hero." Michael settled into his chair, adjusting his uniform jacket slightly. "I appreciate that, but honestly, I was just doing my job. Any of my colleagues would have done the same thing." Ellen had heard this response countless times from humble heroes, but something in Michael's tone suggested it was more than just modesty. There was a weight to his words that she couldn't quite identify. "Well, let's talk about what happened that day," Ellen said, pulling out her notes. "It was October 15th, a Tuesday afternoon. Can you tell us what you remember?" Michael's expression grew more serious, and Ellen noticed his hands tightening slightly on the arms of his chair. "We got the call around 2:30 p.m. Apartment fire in a 6-story building on the south side. By the time we arrived, the building was fully engulfed, flames shooting out of windows on multiple floors." "That must have been terrifying to see." "It's always sobering," Michael nodded. "But our training kicks in. You assess the situation, you make your plan, you execute. We knew there were people trapped inside. Neighbors were screaming that they'd seen families who hadn't made it out." Ellen leaned forward slightly, drawn into the story. "What was going through your mind as you went into that building?" "Honestly, you try not to think too much. Thinking can get you killed in a situation like that. You focus on your training, on your team, on getting people out as quickly and safely as possible. And you managed to rescue 5 people. Michael nodded, but Ellen noticed he didn't smile, didn't show any of the satisfaction she'd expect from someone recounting such a triumph. 5 people, yes, 3 adults and 2 children from different apartments on different floors. That's incredible. Can you walk us through how you found them?" Michael was quiet for a moment, and Ellen could see him deciding how much detail to share. The first was Mrs. Peterson, elderly woman on the 2nd floor. She was overcome by smoke, couldn't make it to the stairs. I carried her out, handed her to the paramedics, went back in. "You went back in?" "4 more times," Michael confirmed. "The Rodriguez family on the 3rd floor, mother and her 6-year-old daughter. They were trapped in a bedroom, window wouldn't open. Got them out through the hallway. Then Mr. Kim on the 4th floor, businessman who'd been working from home. Finally, little Stephanie Chen on the 5th floor. She was hiding under her bed, scared of the noise and the smoke. Ellen was impressed by the matter-of-fact way Michael recounted what was clearly extraordinary courage. 5 people, 5 separate rescues. Captain O'Brien, you literally saved 5 lives that day. Yes, Michael said simply, but there was no pride in his voice. If anything, he seemed to grow more uncomfortable with each detail he shared. The reports I read said you were the last firefighter to leave the building before it became too dangerous to continue rescue operations. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, that's correct. And I understand all 5 people you rescued made full recoveries? They did. Mrs. Peterson had some smoke inhalation, but she's fine now. The Rodriguez family, Mr. Kim, little Stephanie, they're all okay. Ellen smiled warmly. That must give you an incredible sense of satisfaction, knowing that 5 families are intact because of your actions. That's when it happened, the moment everything changed. Michael's composure, which had been holding steady throughout the interview, suddenly cracked. His face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his cheeks, not the happy tears of someone overcome by recognition, but the devastated tears of someone carrying unbearable pain. Ellen's smile faded immediately. The audience, which had been warmly appreciative, fell into confused silence. This wasn't the reaction anyone had expected. Captain O'Brien, Ellen said gently, leaning forward with concern. Are you okay? Michael tried to speak, but only a choked sob came out. He brought his hands to his face, his shoulders shaking with the effort of trying to control emotions that were clearly too big to contain. Ellen looked at her production team, uncertain whether to cut to commercial or stay with this moment. But something in her gut told her that whatever Michael was going through, it needed to be witnessed, not hidden. Michael, Ellen said softly, using his first name for the first time. What is it? What's wrong? Michael finally looked up, his eyes red and filled with a pain so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. There was a 6th person. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Ellen felt her stomach drop. The audience held its collective breath. A 6th person? Ellen repeated, not sure she'd heard correctly. Michael nodded, unable to meet her eyes. A 6th person I couldn't save. Ellen's mind raced, trying to process this information. The reports had all focused on the successful rescues, the lives saved, the heroic actions. Nobody had mentioned someone who didn't make it out. Michael, Ellen said carefully. Who was the 6th person? Michael's entire body seemed to collapse in on itself. The proud firefighter, the decorated captain, the man who had been honored for his courage, suddenly looked like he might disappear entirely. My son, he whispered. The 6th person was my son. The studio went completely silent. Ellen felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The audience was frozen, trying to process what they'd just heard. Your son was in the building? Ellen asked, her voice barely audible. Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. Tommy. He was 8 years old. He was supposed to be at after-school program, but there was some mix-up. He went to his friend Jake's apartment instead. Jake Chen, Stephanie's older brother. Ellen's heart was pounding. Michael, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. When I found Stephanie under the bed, Michael continued, his voice growing stronger even as his pain became more visible. She told me her brother was there too. Said he was in the closet, scared to come out. I had to make a choice. The silence in the studio was deafening. Ellen could hear her own heartbeat. I could only carry one, Michael said, and his voice broke completely. The building was coming down. The ceiling was starting to collapse. I could hear my team screaming for me to get out. I had maybe 30 seconds before the whole floor gave way. Ellen felt tears building in her own eyes as she began to understand the impossible situation Michael had faced. I grabbed Stephanie, Michael whispered. I grabbed the little girl I could reach, and I ran. By the time I got her out, by the time I tried to go back in, he stopped, unable to continue. The building collapsed, Ellen finished gently. Michael nodded. Tommy died in that closet. My 8-year-old son died because I chose to save someone else's child instead of my own. The weight of this revelation settled over the studio like a shroud. Ellen had interviewed thousands of people, had heard countless stories of triumph and tragedy, but she had never encountered anything like this. Michael, she said softly, you saved 5 people that day. I let my son die, Michael replied firmly. I let my own child die to save a stranger's daughter. Ellen was quiet for a long moment, trying to find words that could possibly address the magnitude of Michael's pain and guilt. Finally she spoke. "Michael, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, Michael raised his eyes to meet hers. "You had 30 seconds to make an impossible choice," Ellen said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You saved a life, you saved a child. I failed my son." "You were a father and a firefighter in the same moment," Ellen continued. "You couldn't be both, and in that impossible moment, you chose to be what that little girl needed, her only chance of survival." Michael shook his head. "How do I live with that? How do I go home to my wife and tell her that our son is dead because I saved someone else's child instead?" Ellen felt a chill run through her as she realized the full scope of Michael's torment. "Where is your wife now, Michael?" "Sarah's here," Michael said, glancing toward the audience. "She insisted on coming. She says I'm a hero, that I did the right thing. But I can see it in her eyes, the questions, the doubt. If I'd chosen differently, if I'd grabbed Tommy instead." "Then Stephanie Chen would be dead," Ellen said firmly, "and another family would be destroyed." "Michael, there was no right choice in that moment. There was only an impossible situation created by circumstances beyond your control." "Tell that to my wife when she stares at Tommy's empty bedroom," Michael said bitterly. "Tell that to me when I wake up at 3 a.m. hearing him call for his daddy." Ellen looked out into the audience and spotted a woman in her early 40s with brown hair and eyes red from crying. She was clearly Michael's wife, and the pain on her face was almost as devastating as her husband's. "Sarah," Ellen called gently, "would you come up here?" Sarah O'Brien made her way to the stage slowly, every step seeming to require enormous effort. When she reached Michael, she didn't sit in the empty chair Ellen had gestured to. Instead, she knelt beside her husband's chair and took his hands in hers. "Tell them," Sarah said softly, looking directly at Michael, "tell them what you told me." Michael looked at his wife with eyes full of love and guilt and confusion. "Sarah, tell them," she repeated, more firmly this time. Michael took a shaky breath. "The night after the fire, when they told us Tommy was gone, I came home and Sarah was sitting in his room. She was holding his stuffed elephant, the one he'd had since he was a baby." Ellen and the audience listened intently, sensing they were about to hear something profound. "I thought she would hate me," Michael continued. "I thought she would scream at me, blame me, ask me how I could choose a stranger over our son, but instead she looked at me and said—" He trailed off, unable to continue. Sarah squeezed his hands and spoke for him. "I said, 5 families have their children tonight because of you. Tommy would be proud of his daddy for saving them." The studio was completely silent, absorbing the incredible grace and strength of this woman who had lost her child but still found the capacity to comfort her husband. "But that's not all," Sarah continued, looking directly at Ellen. "I also told him something else." "What else?" Ellen asked gently. "I told him that if the situation had been reversed, if some other father had to choose between saving Tommy or saving his own child, I would want that father to save his own child. Because that's what parents do. That's what love looks like." Ellen felt tears streaming down her face as she processed the impossible complexity of the situation these parents faced. "So you don't blame Michael for the choice he made?" Sarah shook her head firmly. "I blame the fire. I blame the circumstances. I blame the fact that one man was asked to make a choice no human being should ever have to make. But I don't blame my husband for saving a life when he had the chance." Michael looked at his wife with an expression of wonder and gratitude that was heartbreaking to witness. "How do you forgive me when I can't forgive myself?" "Because," Sarah said simply, "forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. Forgiveness is about choosing love over anger, hope over despair, healing over destruction. And because Tommy would want his daddy to keep saving people, not to stop because of what happened to him." Ellen wiped her eyes and looked at both of them. "What do you want people to understand about what happened that day?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with more strength than he'd shown since the interview began. "I want people to understand that heroism isn't about being superhuman. It's about making the best choice you can with the information you have in an impossible situation. I want them to understand that sometimes being a hero means living with the consequences of choices that would destroy most people." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "And I want them to understand that the families of the 5 people I saved, Mrs. Peterson's grandchildren, the Rodriguez family, Mr. Kim's wife, Stephanie, and her parents, they all know about Tommy. They all know what it cost to save their loved ones. And not one of them takes that gift lightly." Ellen nodded, understanding that Michael needed to share this part of his story. Mrs. Chen, Stephanie's mother, she comes to Tommy's grave every month, Sarah added. She brings flowers and tells him thank you. The whole Rodriguez family sent us a card on Tommy's birthday. They haven't forgotten the price of their lives. And that helps? Ellen asked. It helps us know that Tommy's death meant something, Michael replied. That 5 people are alive, that families are intact, that children grew up who might not have otherwise. It doesn't take away the pain, but it gives it purpose. Ellen was quiet. Michael, when you walked onto this stage today, I introduced you as a hero. Do you still feel like that word applies to you? Michael considered the question seriously. I feel like I'm a man who was asked to make an impossible choice and who lives with the consequences every day. Whether that makes me a hero or not, I think that's for other people to decide. But you're still a firefighter, Ellen observed. You're still running into burning buildings. Every day, Michael confirmed. Because that's what Tommy would want, that's what Sarah wants, and because somewhere out there, there might be another father facing the same choice I faced. Maybe my experience, my training, my willingness to carry this burden, maybe it helps save one more life. Ellen looked at Michael and Sarah, at their joined hands, at the love and pain and strength that radiated from both of them, and felt humbled by their resilience. What would you want to say to other people who are carrying impossible guilt? Sarah answered first. That guilt and love often feel the same. That carrying pain doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you cared enough to try. Michael nodded. And that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is keep living, keep serving, keep believing that your next choice might save someone, even when your last choice cost you everything. Ellen stood up slowly, walked over to both of them, and without saying a word, wrapped them both in a hug. It wasn't for the cameras or the audience. It was simply human recognition of extraordinary pain and extraordinary grace. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Michael O'Brien saved 5 lives on October 15th, but today, he and Sarah have reminded all of us what real courage looks like. It's not just about running into burning buildings. It's about living with impossible choices, finding meaning in loss, and choosing to keep serving others even when service has cost you everything. The audience rose to their feet in applause, but it wasn't celebratory. It was reverent, respectful, the kind of recognition given to people who have endured the unendurable and somehow found the strength to continue. The episode ended differently than Ellen had planned. There were no big reveals, no surprise gifts, no moments of pure joy. Instead, there was something rarer and more precious, absolute honesty about the cost of heroism and the complexity of love. In the months that followed, Michael continued his work as a firefighter. He also began speaking to other first responders about trauma, guilt, and the psychological cost of life and death decisions. Sarah started a support group for families of first responders, helping others navigate the unique challenges of loving someone whose job requires them to risk everything for strangers. Together they established the Tommy O'Brien Foundation, which provides counseling and support for children who have lost parents in the line of duty and for first responders struggling with trauma-related guilt. The interview became one of the most shared and discussed in Ellen's history, not because it provided easy answers or happy endings, but because it honored the complexity of real heroism. Viewers wrote in by the thousands, sharing their own stories of impossible choices, unbearable guilt, and the daily courage required to continue serving others after profound loss. Michael never stopped missing his son. Sarah never stopped grieving the child they lost. But they learned to carry their pain as a testament to love rather than as evidence of failure. And somewhere in Chicago, 5 families continued their lives, grateful every day for the man who chose to save them, fully aware of what that choice cost him, determined to live lives worthy of the sacrifice that made their survival possible. Because sometimes heroism isn't about saving everyone. Sometimes it's about making the best choice you can in an impossible moment, and then finding the strength to live with that choice for the rest of your life.